Where's our host?
Good morning, or good afternoon, depending on wherever you are. Morning for you, Kathleen. I know that.
Yes, it
Nice to
is.
meet you. Thanks for joining us.
So, yes, fellas meet each other.
Hey, hi, Kathleen. Thanks for inviting me. Hi, Inish. Nice to meet you. My name is Atul. I'm in Ottawa. So we're probably in the same time zone.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah.
I'm in Orleans, so
Okay.
not
Nice
far.
to meet you.
Likewise, likewise. So what part where are you exactly?
I'm in Canada.
Okay.
Of course.
The
That's
other end of Ottawa.
that's
Yeah.
where technology was thriving.
Is thriving, I'd still say.
Okay, good.
Probably could. Um, yeah, it's just I think Orleans is the sad part of Ottawa that attracts no industry or investment. Canada and even South End seems to be growing quite well.
Yeah.
That's true. Why is that?
Transportation, lack
Hmm.
of probably, I think language has a big part of it. Uh,
I
Hmm.
East
think
End's
it's
quite
also
francophone and public servants, and I find South End, especially Canada, is full of private sector companies that are bilingualism's not mandated and
Yeah.
probably attract a wider variety of human capital.
I
Hmm.
think it also had to do initially with land tax. So it was just it was cheaper to locate out in Canada, in fact, build this whole new community and just because Ottawa was so much more pricey. So
Yeah.
Interesting. That makes sense.
comes down to the money. Hi, Eric.
Hello.
Morning, Eric, rather. And something else I've realized are the transportation routes. Canada's got the ability to grow the east end, and widening of the highway is restricted, so it can't.
Hmm.
And then the 417 takes you around the south end, and then the 416 takes you down the south as well, where we're seeing that sprawl. So the 417, and down the 416 facilitates that growth. So Orleans is choked. We'll never see that growth.
Well, it's interesting too. This does have politics involved with it because provincially, I forget when. I think I lived there at the time, but the municipalities were amalgamated. So Ottawa suddenly had all kinds of rural in it, which was curious. But so I think that was also, an impetus to actually, okay, let's move out there. So,
Yeah,
Well, I
and
asked because about 5 years, 2 years ago, I interviewed for General Manager of Strategic Initiatives of the City of Ottawa,
okay.
and they had a four-pronged development plan. I hope I'm not taking too much of the real conversation time, but the development plan involved transportation, economic development, climate, and housing. And it feels like, they may have missed a beat here in not including Orleans as a potential for housing, transportation, and economic development planning.
Yeah. This is important. It is linked because we want to talk about risk and we want to talk about all of the elements of risk and actually how systems interconnect. So this was a good segue.
Hmm.
it is, and just to add my other observations, in that amalgamation, the segment of highway 174 that goes to the east end into Orleans is owned by the municipality versus the other
Mm.
highways are owned by the province and get more funding. So it becomes an onus on the city. Although there's been an agreement recently to transfer that, or at least get capital support payments related to it. However, prioritized light rail. Uh,
Oh, yeah.
Orleans was one of the high priority phase two, or whatever phase we're getting at, which is 3 years behind schedule, which could be a call
No,
on its own in terms of procurement.
I think it's a couple of decades actually.
And there's just a quick side note. Quebec wins the Quebec Windsor corridor, the rail
Yeah.
that was to be established and high speed rail that we've been talking about for decades that never came to be because of Air Canada and airline lobbyists pressuring the government to not move in that direction because it impacts them. So the
The machinations behind the scenes.
that's exactly it. So looking at the pieces, understanding what those factors are. So if it is the different ownership of the highway and the infrastructure, then what does connect the municipality, the demographics, the so there at least this was the case. In the other parts of Ottawa, there's a wider income range in the other suburbs. In Orleans had a more I guess balanced middle class because of the high volume of francophones, therefore public servants, and so the neighborhoods are, I guess, a strong middle class, and that plays a part in terms of quality of schools, the teachers it attracts because they're partners, or it's there's all these factors at play that determine um, to understand what that environment is facing and everything that influences everything. So with that, uh, we have two conversations that we said we get into. One in terms of modular housing and the risk, and then Eric and I have, and Peter, when he was able to attend, have been talking or we're looking at the Greenland scenario and
Mm,
talking about that. So why don't we
that's
start, since
connected.
we're on the topic of housing, start with housing, but draw a line in the sand to allow for time. So let's say by 12:30, we'll switch over to the Greenland talk and then can come back. So in 23 minutes.
What kind
So,
of modular
okay.
housing?
Pardon me,
So,
Eric?
What kind of modular housing? Are we talking timber? Are we talking concrete? Are we talking in general faster built? What's our orientation?
industrialized construction. So all of those are possibilities, and they're actually underway right now in different locations. So yes, all of that.
So just
But
faster housing.
what a tool has done is put together a huge, which is good, risk. Um, well, it's software, right? It's a program,
Yeah.
and it's taking a look at the entire risk profile of housing in general, but with a focus on industrialized construction. And I think it's personally, I think it's a great thing to do. It's past timely because there are so many um, industrialized construction firms. I think Katira was probably the largest one that have they just keep sliding under. And I mean I'm a proponent of industrialized construction because the construction industry has such low productivity rates, and in fact they've been flat for decades. So we need to move into the 21st century, although we're a good way into it now. But no, so I like that, and so Atul and I have been back and forth with questions. I always have lots of questions. And I think part of the when we look at the whole scenario, and this includes, Eric, this includes land, how we look at the bigger picture and look at the inherent risk in each step and whether or not some of these steps can take place concurrently. And in fact, I would think that they could, and what risks are inherent. And then we get into the layers of government and who's responsible for what and who can actually influence changes because of that. So it just a personal pursuit of mine. I connected with some other folks, but we're looking at civics literacy, and we're looking at putting together. We don't know where yet, but this is how Canada works. Feds, provincial, municipal, because people just really don't know. And that's a huge risk, actually, where housing is concerned, because people are confused all the time. And I mentioned probably the last time we met, that I had occasion to meet with the federal minister of housing, and they have this program. So everyone's confused. Oh boy, the feds are in charge of housing. Well, they're building on federal land with the National Building Code, and all they had to do was tell provinces, oh, by the way, we're going to be, building some homes in these cities in your province, and then they notified the municipalities. But so people are confused. They think the feds are in charge of housing. They have influence, they have impact, but that's really not that simple. So
If
Just
I
for the
may,
record, I'm not confused. I knew this a long time ago.
yeah.
And but my biggest issue, having tried to develop installations, is the time and money we spend on the development, on the permitting side.
Hmm.
So those were big issues for us.
For everyone,
In my
actually.
experience too, in personal project or developing real estate outside of corporate or government work, the barrier to entry, the cost, the unknowns, the debt servicing while you're waiting for the municipal bureaucrats and committees to go through their steps is the biggest risk I see it. It's the other pieces are so minor compared to that front end. And it's as if the message isn't getting through. And after last week's conversation and looking at the Build Canada plan or whatever the housing initiative's called, and seeing how it is still reliant on the municipality, delivery is localized, and it's still going through the red tape and the gates that municipalities establish. That's, I think, the place to start. Well,
On the ground. Yeah.
yeah, it is. It's where is it getting delivered? And if you put out a survey to every builder and had a simple multiple choice question to get this data back, not that there's really any mystery of where the challenges are, to help guide policymakers to make the right decisions. There's sufficient, the data's out there, knowledge is out there, studies, the articles, the op-ed, it's there, and we keep making the same mistake. So looking at the what you've shared and the comprehensiveness of it, it really, there's a few questions I have, and just getting understanding of where the software tool is in use and what outcomes you're trying to achieve. Is it more tactical for specific projects? First, if you're looking at residential single family homes versus multifamily commercial construction, it depends on what you're trying to achieve.
If I might,
yeah,
if I could just throw one thing in, I would be very interested in, because I see motivating and accountability on the government side to push that, because they're the key blocker. If your software, how your software can be used that to provide that motivation would be a wonderful answer for me, and very, very important for a few things that we're doing or talking
Sure.
about doing or not doing because of the Canada or more permissive jurisdiction issue.
yeah. So if I may take a step back and start with, my context was Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. I worked there for about 10 years. And what I learned at CMHC in the last 6 years, where I was in innovation and partnerships, is that there is no silver bullet to fix housing affordability issues. No surprise there. But I left with the awareness in 2024 that while there is no silver bullet, the brightest ray of hope is we build differently. And what I mean by build differently is we take greater accountability within the industry to reduce the cost of construction. It's always been construction cost is whatever it is, finance and other costs are added to that, and then that becomes the minimum house price, in addition to the developer incentives, cap rate and IRR and all of that. So it's always been a cost plus model. And I am a Lean Six Sigma black belt, like Kathleen is a believer in Lean. I'm a huge believer in
Practitioner.
Lean as well. So my take is that, if we are disciplined about it, if we identify where are the inefficiencies, then we are likely to be able to resolve them. So that was one premise. The second companion premise is that if we build differently using industrialized construction, we have the opportunity to change how housing is financed. So today, housing finance is typically, the lender has a formula for underwriting. Collateral is a big part of that. If the collateral is valuable, then the lender will finance. And if there's residual risk, CMHC will insure. And at least in multifamily housing, CMHC is the only player. In single family, there are a couple of other players as well for insurance. But fundamentally, lenders are highly protected, so cost of borrowing remains low. Low cost of borrowing helps with demand side, not with the supply side, because the cost is not controlled. Now, that was a starting premise 2 years ago. As I looked into why has this idea not taken off, it is such a simple idea. Build in the factories. You can build 24/7, 365, and you can achieve greater efficiencies in a controlled environment, minimize losses, accidents, and all of that. Why hasn't it happened? So as I looked at the history of failures, so I did about 6 months of analysis on that around the world, UK, US, Canada. I learned that it's because we keep repeating the same pattern of failure. And there are recurring patterns of failure that are encoded into this piece of software I call Modular. Those patterns are available now to any developer, factory, lender, insurer, or Build Canada Homes or CMHC to identify what is the likely risk that they're taking on their project and what is their mitigation plan. And it makes risk assessment really easy. One of the big problems with risk management is the construction industry is great at risk transference, but not risk management. So as a developer, I get, builder's insurance, wrap up liability, um, and a lot of the general contractor work is covered within that. GCs may have their own insurance on top of that from a incident management and liability standpoint. Architects have their own professional liability insurance, but nobody is actively trying to minimize the risks, and nobody shares each other's risks transparently. So when it comes to industrialized construction, unless the factory knows what are the weaknesses of the BIM model produced by the architect and the engineering firm, they cannot tool themselves optimally for producing the units required. Same and vice versa. If the developer doesn't know what are the risks that the factory is exposed to in terms of having um, a production plan, time slot allocated to different clients, quality control and quality assurance plan. If they don't have all of that, they cannot necessarily provision for that risk at their end. And so there's a dysfunction within the insurance industry as well when it comes to industrialized construction. So BCH is very keen on learning all of this. So I'm working with them closely, but I don't know what is the next practical step with them. They learn. I'm proposing to them that as you receive the RFPs for the 5 sites that you've announced, let me cycle through Modular. I'll tell you which proposals are better or not. But it's kind of then getting into that territory of public procurement. So I'm not getting a lot of traction there. Yeah, fundamentally, the belief is that if the risks are managed transparently, then better insurance coverage at a more effective price can be available. And if that is available, then lenders will be more interested in financing it. Because right now, industrial construction requires more upfront capital with lesser collateral and poorer transparency of risk management.
Well, some immediate thoughts in just the go-to-market strategy. I would think of who has the greatest, who wins the most out of all the avatars you named financially, or who has the most to lose? So is it government, insurance? Well, government, I would just leave out of it completely at this point. Builder, developer, banks, insurance. Which one of those parties has the greatest amount to win or lose? And focus on strictly that single avatar and productizing or creating the interface for them and demonstrating the value proposition or the risk reduction in their adoption.
Yeah.
That's because it's comprehensive, and it's what's that one pain point you're solving and for who. That's where I see it, because it varies by, there's so many different factors on the type of construction, the location, the builder,
Yeah. Yeah.
like you said, that risk transfer or acceptance or sharing doesn't exist.
So my thinking around this, and I'm still mulling it over, is who ultimately directs all of this together? Because this is still a very linear system. And as much as industrial construction can um, shorten that line, it's really important, as you mentioned. I mean, architects and engineers need to be involved. They have to understand industrial construction. They have to understand how things get built, when they get built, the details. The information needs to be very much part of, you know, the flow of decision making. When I was at this, I mean, and that's what we still do, but we function for the owner.
Hmm.
So, who is the owner in this? Because that's the best way to encourage everyone come together, which we did, in a lean fashion. That everyone's got to be in the room at the same time. We're not doing this design, bid, build. We are doing this lean. Everyone's in the room. We're all going to work through the design details, the logistics of getting it done. We're going to talk about the monetary impact and the risks around all of this. So it's shared risk and reward. We set targets. You know what? Bring this project in X amount of percentage under assumed budget, the results get divided. Everyone wins here. So the motive was there too, financial motive. So I think, how do we get ownership and everyone in the same room at the same time?
So I'll present two perspectives on that, Kathleen. So when there is an established process that you're trying to improve, and you can predict the likely improvement pretty accurately or reasonably accurately, then you can incentivize participation by sharing
Right?
the improvement. But the flip side of this industry is that it's not a mature industry. It's been there for a very long time. It has a long history of failures. Factories continue to believe that if we build a better unit, then there will be demand for it. And many factories have perished in the process. So ATCO is probably one of the longest survivors in Canada. And they were able to do that because their product segment was changed to suit the market. They
Yeah.
manufacture trailers. Northgate Industries, they manufacture mining homes. Um, there are examples of people going away from housing because housing is too unpredictable in terms of the flow. Like uh, you talked about, Anish, you talked about the permitting delays. Eric also mentioned that, right? And that's a killer with industrial construction because if you cannot predict when to start manufacturing, well, you're sitting on raw material inventory, you're sitting on land costs, it's a nightmare,
Yeah.
right? You cannot deliver more cost effectively. And if you cannot deliver, then why will lenders want to invest in that? So there's a lot of gaps in understanding of what does everyone need to do to align things. And which is why, Hinesh, I struggle with if I find any one partner to work with, essentially I'm asking them to do a lot of the heavy lifting because you've got to bring all the partners together. And the only person that may be willing enough to do it is the developer and the owner's rep.
I think it's incentives. Everything is accountability, is incentives, and knowing where you're headed. So if the risk really, if the rewards shared, that balances the risks where people are incentivized to come play together in the sandbox, they will come. And understanding what that looks like and having open conversations of, hey, this is where you're facing resistance. I know it's a challenge. This is what I'm exploring. What would it look like for you to come play? By the way, I'm
Hmm.
speaking with these other players. And then start herding the cats together and understand what they need. So that's one piece. The other piece, and what I like looking at, are the extremes of what is working. Always understanding things are failing. Right? We're trying to, even if you set up panels, I want to mass produce panels and ship them out. And of course, there's demand because it speeds things up. It's quality control, climate control, all these factors. It's built to an ISO standard or creating that. But what I heard you say and where my mind went was, yeah, Atco trailers. Atco's done a really good job, and they're everywhere in the world. I've used them. And then I think about the other end of the spectrum of when is modular? And I look at older construction or tradespeople, and you had a door. Carpenter had a door, used his skills to add the hinges, to build the frame, to install it. Now you've got pre-hung doors in a completely prefab.
Yeah.
Is that modular? So that spectrum now is
Yeah.
that door with frame to the ACO trailer and everything in between. So what's starting to, at what point and when does it start failing? Because it's working. We're getting modular as those door frames, as windows, as you go to Home Depot and there's less work for me to do. I can just get something prefab, come in, kick out my old thing, put in my new thing.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
what's working and start looking at those examples.
Yeah, so I think the degrees of integration are important. There are two variables that the industry likes to use: pre-manufactured value of what is built in the factory and what is delivered on site. So the higher the PMV, the better it is from a cost efficiency standpoint, if other risks can be managed. But then for higher PMV, there are two options. You have to either invest a lot in a factory that can manufacture different components and integration of those components, or to achieve a higher PMV, you have to have back-to-back outsourcing contracts. So with, roof trusses are a good
I
example
was
where,
just going to bring that up. Yeah,
right, it's
exactly.
pretty common.
Yeah.
And kitchens are another component, which is also stairs and kitchens, where it's pretty common, cabinetry. And so the real question becomes, what is geographically plausible from an integration standpoint? Where are the component producers, manufacturers located? And what is the diversity of product available? So if you are single threaded there, then you create scheduling problems for yourself by working with them. So these are like NRB, no, not NRB, Beck Modular went under for many of these reasons that their back-to-back supply arrangements were weak.
Mm.
So I want to throw in another idea here because I know a tool that you've checked out, the Dash system in BC Housing,
Yeah.
which is really a takeoff on what the feds are doing, which I think has great potential. But it seems to me, at least through my exploration and experience, is that if somehow there could be funding for infrastructure, and so that we could do away with development charges because that's to theoretically build up the purse for
Hmm.
infrastructure. So if the feds did a deal with the provinces to actually, contribute to infrastructure funding, and the provinces then with municipalities, and to just totally remove all of that out of the development sequence, that would shave months, if not years, off of the whole timeline as well. So I think that because it is a big industry, that there may be a number of different incentives that will reduce risk at different interplays or with different participants in this.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, the Dash program, what I like about their program is that they are starting with, here's the land available, and here are the zoning restrictions on it, development, and planning restrictions on it. And so that is a missing piece of information for many developers, and they have to spend money on figuring out if if the kind of land they need is available or not. But then the economics for that have to still be discovered. What is the viable rent in that place, or cost versus cap rate or IRR you may get from development. And then you have to, as a developer, find a factory. But then they have some pre-approved designs that seem to suggest that it'll be easier to find a factory that can build that. Well, that's pipe dream. You don't have too many factories that have set themselves up for these pre-approved designs because there's no demand for that right
Yeah.
No, and we should move on to the Greenland conversation.
Sure,
I think we could spend half a day on this, and it's really about boiling down where you want to go. If you look back about 5 years, government of Canada introduced the World War II housing kits, and it didn't take. And when I thought about it, I'm like, why didn't this take? No one's incentivized. So now you've got a house that's going to need less space that generates less revenue for a municipality to encourage it. You don't have the tradespeople, the architects and the engineers and those professionals getting paid on the project. You don't have if I'm a tradesperson or a GC, I'm not going to go take this on when I could lead a larger construction. And so when you look at that value chain of who makes money on this type of housing actually getting established, it didn't take for those reasons. And I didn't know about Dash. Just looking it up right now, I feel we're going to see similar results. It's not going to be, we're not incentivizing people the right way, and we're not addressing the real barriers, which comes down to the municipalities.
Right now, the situation is no method of building housing is palatable.
No, it's be able to get money. The barrier, last thing I'll say before we go to Greenland, is the collateral, the letter of credits that builders or developers have to put up at the beginning is resistance.
Mm-hmm.
The approvals and carrying the debt to build is resistance. That, if we just focus on reducing that and the barrier and having a guaranteed service level of turnaround with municipalities, even with planning committees and any bylaw, what's the word I'm looking for? I've been through this enough to know, but I can't. Any of those approvals.
Variances.
Thank you. Yes, variances, minor variances. To have that, to get that, has to be on a by X date.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be predictable. There has to be an understanding of the debt and risk developers have to carry to be able to bring this to life. There's nowhere else I would look. Later for modular, that's for me, it would just be a geographical consideration of housing in a certain space, going out to the developer saying, I can produce this and develop this for you. What do you think? And start lining up the demand to be able to give them a standardized efficiency that they can rely on. That's my thing.
Thank you for sharing that.
I'll throw in one last thing. There is growing, well, there always was demand, but it's growing, and there's more attention being paid to the north and building housing in the north. And the only way that is ever going to work is through modular and industrial construction, just because of transportation challenges.
You need a better
And also
transportation. You need a better transportation function to support that.
Yes. Well, what happens now and has happened for some time is sea lift. So, but the other part of this is that there is no construction crews in all of these communities.
Now,
So
Eric's brought up other. This I was smiling and I'm pointing at Eric on my screen because we've had this conversation and the challenges of up north. So combined with the exits or the lack of replacements of tradespeople coming in, let alone the that supply or presence in the north, we need to have a different model, and it's about
Yep.
price. It's getting it there. And so Eric's got different ideas and models on how to get that from sea to in situ.
Mhm.
Cool. I want to talk green sites too.
Yes. So yeah, Eric, why don't you kick us off and I'll just lay out what the different conversations we have on Wednesdays is looking at policy, geopolitical events, what this means, and so this has been something that we've wanted to do a bit of a dig into or dive into for the last I think month. So we finally get the opportunity. So go ahead, Eric.
So I don't think we should be surprised by the Trump administration or by the administration or even the general American perspective on Greenland. The, um, the only difference really is what is driving their perspective on why it matters now, as opposed to 50 years ago. Okay, and so like how we respond to that is a different issue. But the drivers on why they're doing it, I think, have been very, very evident. And I'm not surprised that they're in a really pissy mood about their national security. Now, that also means while Greenland is easy, uh, fairly good economics, a nice ski choke point, it also is the same story for the rest of the Canadian North, too. So, our response to Greenland, I think, is very, very important because it's also what will be the response when it happens to us. So that's kind of my viewpoint.
I agree, and I've put a lot of thought into it because when it's happening, I immediately thought this is a distraction for something else. And then looking at the logical elements of it is the U.S. already has a military presence on Greenland. The North is thawing access to the North, access to minerals. Canada has the same, but getting that control through the marine routes made sense. Uh, the other piece, it's like there's something more here, and I'm speculating on this, but when I dug into, okay, routes, transportation, security, the Russian horde coming over the north, as we used to call it in Army doctrine, um, or the Soviet horde, the Red Horde. The other thing, as I dug into things, was understanding the telecommunication and fiber communication fibers throughout the world, and
Yep.
there are three other major intersections of cabling throughout the world. And this cable, this in Greenland, there's an intersection under of all communication between North America and Europe goes through this node there. So that's the only other piece I could think of because communication, data transmission, information ops, interference can all be managed if you have possession of that site. So that's what I've landed on for this is why they want it.
Well,
So why do you do it? Or what do you do about it? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Kathleen.
no, I just this is just some information that twigged with me. It reminded me when I was a deputy minister up there in Nunavut, I was actually approached by this dude, and he was working to get undersea cable, communication cable from China to Europe. And because it has, a certain length driven need to come ashore and get powered and so on, he was looking at doing that at Cambridge Bay, which is really on the uppermost part of the Arctic, and then bringing it down. And he was trying to sell me so that I could sell the politicians, I guess, on having all of this cabling support communities in Nunavut. They're all they're all on the shoreline because that's how they're served, right? And
Mhm.
I thought, wow, isn't this interesting? So firstly, this is a conversation that needs to be had with folks in Ottawa as well. And wow, so yes, there is certainly it's out of sight and it's out of mind, but it is there, cabling that runs under the water that connects. I mean, satellites are important for sure, and a lot more communication is done via satellite, but so much is also done with cabling under the ocean. It's very interesting.
Also have to think of when, like, I'm not a big supporter of cable to a destination in the Arctic or in the north because you look at density,
Yeah.
serving density, and whether you're talking mass transit or telecom, it's the same issue, and that's why I argue that we should have had our own low. We should have been in space years ago, and we should have been leading the Starlink approach because we need it for our country. And I actually said this to the NDP back in 2019. They said, "Well, what ideas can we fund with infrastructure? Satellites.
Yeah.
We've got remote. We could use the satellites on the prairies, let alone in the north. So
Yes.
why wouldn't we do it? But we
So
haven't."
you're
I
right.
I disagree. I think satellite and any RF or any non-physical links needs to be secondary. I'm a huge proponent for hard infrastructure, spend the money, link up the infrastructure in the north, and that becomes
How
the
are you going to
base.
deal with the cost when you don't have the density?
Look at the rest of our country. We're founded, connected, created with railroad. We couldn't support that. But if that's those lines of communication, highways, rail, data lines need to be prioritized, and it's not an immediate ROI. There has to be long term.
Less than 200,000 people across 40% of our geographic area.
Yeah,
Okay. So you're not talking point to point unless we're transferring stuff through. That's a significant issue. And all of this also goes right back to Greenland. Right? Why is Greenland at risk? 56,000 people. They want to be an independent state. They aren't going to be able to defend themselves against somebody. Okay. It's barely defensible against, as they're part of Denmark. Okay. And that's because Denmark is also part of NATO. And then coming back to Greenland, that comes back to why I think that the response should be, yeah, this is breaching Article 4 in the NATO thing. If you don't stop it, can get out. Should be the response from NATO to the Americans.
but
You
that's a
want to do an
non-starter.
Article 5? Okay, then we will. You want to be the recipient of Article 5? Okay, then you're going to be. You need to get out. You need to stop this. You can't deal with this type of. I respect the fact that the Americans are no, annoyed with with the lack of the rest of our support for national security. I understand that. Frankly, I'm annoyed with us too. But there's still some behaviors that just aren't okay. And we're not tough enough. I mean, we, as in Canada and the rest of NATO, are not tough enough in saying, yeah, that's just not acceptable. And that has impacts because that's going to impact, that makes the longer ambiguous to the United States behavior, also means that the Russians are more interested in saying, yeah, well, if they're not going to do that in here, sure, we can go take the Baltics.
So
And then it's an absolute mess and we're all screwed.
I think that the world is complex for sure. There's lots of dancing going on that we're not aware of, and it's not always so directed A, B, C, D. But the bottom line to all of this, as with most of the world, is economics. You know, everything is driven by economics. And again, I have some stories from the north. Here in Canada, we are monopolized by what, three, four companies. And it doesn't really matter the industry that you're looking at. We have monopolies, and so there needs to be, and it's not just Canada, it is rather around the world, but talking about Canada, we have the ability to regulate so that we don't have monopolies. And that has huge impact on food security. It has huge impact across this country. Provinces are, you know, dreaming up all kinds of regulations for God knows why, but it really separates our ability to perform. Again, when I was up at up in Nunavut, oh, there was a contract underway for satellite communication. And so there's actually a a really interesting, innovative company that's in Hay River, I think, in Northwest Territories. Anyway, SSI Micro. And so we were working with Indian Affairs or Indian Northern Affairs at the time for getting this dealt with. So we were meeting with CRTC, and it was brilliant. It was completely unplanned. But here we are in Yellowknife meeting with the CRTC, and the existing satellite wobbled throughout communications all across the north, Nunavut, Northwest Territories, Yukon, and parts of BC. And so what we were trying to message at CRTC is no, 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 no. We don't want just Northwest Tel. We have to stop with these monopolies because we need resiliency. We need backup. Anyway, we won the day, and I was really pushing for SSI Micro. Just a brilliant, brilliant way of dealing with these communications. He's actually set up in Ottawa as well. But so check him out. He's a brilliant guy. I support him all the time. Anyway, it has to do with our mindset as a country that we need monopolies. That if you're not big, then you won't, survive in Canada. That's bunk.
That's, I don't think it's that we need monopoly, it's that the monopolies are in control and they don't want to let it go.
Well,
Uh,
yes.
but one of the things that you said, and one of my biggest problems that, us arguing about, or in the position of economics as priority, I say that in a contentious world, we need to accept the fact that economics have to go in line with national security.
Yes.
Because when you look at Russian behavior, and they've been this way for hundreds and hundreds of years, it's if we're not making it, we can take it. And that mindset is the mindset that we have to recognize is active today. And you need to be strong enough to be able to resist. And
Well,
that's a
that
reality.
that's an active mindset currently in the US of A, likewise.
That's the Russian mindset, yes,
Yes.
because let's face it, that's why they're such good friends. Uh, um, Friends, but it's the same behaviors, right? And if we continue to focus just on economics without baking in the national security question into the economics, all we're doing is making ourselves a bigger target.
So I have to tell you, I'm a systems thinker. I see this as a tapestry. Economics is a rather big thread that runs through
Yep.
it, but it is not the whole tapestry. But it has influence in stitching all kinds of other things together. So yes, we cannot look at one thing in isolation. Firstly, that's not how it works. Everything is connected in some fashion to economics. So, and actually why it's my interest in civics literacy, because all of these decisions about economics are made by our elected officials, and that happens at various levels. So
Yep.
And I think it is all, I think everything, follow the money to understand decisions and looking at the bigger going to get bigger because what's been happening is they back political
oh
campaigns.
yeah, yeah.
They influence they influence the decision makers and it's easier to give money grants contributions towards a single recipient than many and manage it. And whether it's Stellantis, whether it's Honda battery plant where billions go, as opposed to creating something that incentivizes and drives growth and innovation to SMBs, because that is where economic growth happens. It's investment in human capital, it's innovation support to SMBs or SMEs, and then being able to build out any infrastructure to facilitate the movement of knowledge, goods, services.
Well, that's such a good point. And I think one of the things that influences our thinking around this is the time things take. Like projects take a long time because they are complex, and if they are actually on the ground, they take an awfully long time. So we need to have people understand how these things work and why, I believe in industrial construction because it's components and it's assembling these, and all of these things are taking place at the same time in different areas. You assemble it, you understand the risks, and why I really like what Atul is trying to do here because one of the risks is also understanding timelines and what makes sense and what doesn't, and what's standing in the way of moving things forward or protecting something or whatever. So it's being able to look at this whole tapestry together and then map out where the largest risks are.
If I may add a couple of slightly different perspectives that I haven't heard so far. I think in the global landscape, one of the things that is playing a big part is growth in global debt. So we are almost at $1 trillion, and a lot of that debt has inadvertently flowed into enriching the billionaires of the world. And we have many large cap companies, mega cap companies, hyperscalers that are also now reliant on monopolies for stability. So you have these hyperscalers that need monopolies for stability. You can't have 100 different utility providers feeding into one data center. You want one large data center, one large utility. So now you're supporting one large utility in one area, whether you like it or not. And so that one mega trend I think is significant, and the US is at the epicenter of the global debt load.
It's almost like
Combined with de-dollarization,
it's
right?
almost like oligarchies, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
it is.
Are very
And you
going.
combine that with de-dollarization, and you have another layer of that phenomenon where you cannot trade in US dollar because the tariffs are high, if you want to trade with the US as a partner. But you cannot buy things from the US either, which you're reliant upon. So building alternate supply chains requires these alternate trade agreements. And Europe and India have one, China and Canada have one now. So I
And that
think,
takes a bit of time, right?
right. But I do think that in about 10 years, US, this is not a reversible process. I think US is not as powerful an entity in 10 years.
I agree.
I'm not sure, but I spent a lot of time trying to map this out and forecast where the world's turning and look at the other players. And as of, if you asked me 2 months ago, I was very certain with that statement. And then digging into the alternative, the other players where the EU is, where China is, and really, I think they're peaking. They managed to touch 5% GDP growth, but they're going down with the shrinking population, with the real estate bubble. I think some interesting things are going to happen after their leaders, the end of his third-year term next year in Taiwan. Separate story, but they aren't the powerhouse that we maybe led to believe. Then I was looking at, and so I had this theory about the evaporation of US debt because they're creeping up to the 130%
GDP, yeah.
GDP debt to GDP ratio, which is a critical ratio where civil unrest, lack, inability to service the debt, and things are degrading. Looking at crypto as a way to hype up investment into something to then crush it. So, say if the CIA did create Bitcoin and there's this drive to um, create uncertainty in the greenback and drive people into that space to eradicate debt and exploring that theory, looking at what is a true fiat currency and does the US dollar hold or not hold, looking at past downfalls of empires and trying to look at, okay, where's this happening? What correlates, what doesn't? Yes, on an individual basis, they are becoming less productive. As a country, they are becoming more productive. So how does that work? Looking at the amount of US debt held by other countries, they are so many countries are indirectly invested into the US, they can't afford to see the US fail. And how do they exit their positions from that? I don't
Ask Denmark.
I don't know.
Denmark has just sold their bond interests.
They
Now,
have, but then
relative,
who took it? Right?
yeah.
Someone else is carrying that debt now.
Well, at some point, that could be the start of the fall because when fear enters the bond market, look out, things just take a dive. And that's a worry as well.
There,
So,
there is,
Denmark may be a first mover.
it
Maybe
could
we can
be.
get out of
It,
this
it,
lucky.
it's a bellwether, right? Of will this translate to others? But then at the end of the day, they are an military might aside. They are the big brother to anybody else, big brother or big bully, depending on how you look at it. They're there to save you, but they're there to further their economic or energy interests, which are one and the same. The last piece that was fascinating that there's more pieces, but something that understanding the difference between the different types of digital currencies and realizing stable coins. How many countries are ditching their own currencies to invest in US peg stable coins, which again, there's more investment into or more confidence in the future of the US and the US economy. And they are by far the largest consumer of the world and will continue to be for the long run, at least 5 years out. So I actually feel that they're going to maintain power for much longer. And with the current president and the actions he's taking, he's strengthening their future. So may not be right, but the things that he's doing that keeps them where they're at. So 2 months ago, very different opinion. After I did my various deep dives, confident that the U.S. will stay where they're at.
I
Actually, I just had
disagree
a
because of, I disagree, and we're talking generation wise, so I'm not talking about the next 2 years. But because they've moved looking inward, Trump is just an example of the United States looking inward, okay, and grab what you can. And as he's doing those grabs, he's burning bridges. And that is going to cost him over the long term. Yeah, you get away with being the bully, but the aspect of the biggest military power, you have to consider how power, what is power, okay? Because look at Ukraine versus Russia. That's that's more than 3 to 1, and they can't even get arms, right? Like they have to build their own, so they have to build their own structure. The nature of being able to deploy power over the last quarter century has changed, and how you can hit and how hard you can get hit from a state or a non-state actor is different today. And we are thinking in those mindsets over the last quarter century. And that if they don't adapt, and they're trying to adapt fast, but they've also motivated other people to adapt faster.
I'd
And
like to
that's going to be their problem.
I'd like to throw another angle in here, and that is AI, the whole digital thing. The number of data centers being built uh, around the world is huge. It's monster, and particularly in the U.S. I had a really insightful conversation with a couple of folks, three of them actually, two from the US and one from Australia. We were talking about data centers, but we were talking about risk and resilience relative to them because they are exploding as cities now, and the amount of power and water that they are using is unreal. So that becomes a huge draw, and they're getting pushback on these data centers from people who live in the area and use the water and power. So they're looking to other places, like Canada, where there's more water and energy and so on. So keep that in mind because that's a huge driver, but also what's behind it. And this was interesting because well, actually, the three of them were also very much invested and knowledgeable about uh, disasters and disaster recovery and environmental things going on right now. And in fact, they work internationally on stuff like this. And they're very concerned, and they're very concerned with what they're seeing in effect on the United States and actually around the world because they're global. And they couldn't identify any particular area or any particular thing happening, but they are aware of and trying to get the message out there that we have to be looking at risk and resilience because, and whether we're talking about, you know, um, buildings or whether we're talking about communities, infrastructure. So think of Calgary and the flooding going on there. And actually, on Thursday, I'm talking to someone who's involved in infrastructure planning and repair and stuff like that. So, and again, so I'm looping back to our discussion on risk because we have not been thinking properly about our infrastructure. So, water, sewer, power, and so on, and how we might better do that because that's a huge driver of the cost of housing and risk. It's unseen. So, again, combining technology potential here, there are companies now with technology that can zip through these lines and determine if they are about to collapse or not.
Yeah.
So then it's getting these communities investing in this too, right? So that could really eliminate a lot of risk for them because they suddenly know what's going on. But then it's also convincing governments to invest in maintenance, and that's always been a really difficult thing, right? So,
I put in the chat the agility advantage. I don't know if I mentioned that before to you, Kathleen.
oh,
You
okay.
might find it interesting on how they break down um, agility because the whole premise is in a dynamic environment, you need agility because you don't know what to plan for.
Yeah.
In a static environment, you can plan for things. That's fine. In a dynamic environment, you need an infrastructure that is built so that you can make that resilience happen. So I
Mhm.
think you might be interested in that book.
I absolutely will. Actually, I'm going into a discussion in about 30 minutes or so with an author. This is his book. You won't be able to see this. Anyway, it's called Strategic Learning: Our Way Through Uncertainty and Complexity and Crises.
Mhm.
He's from the UK and he set up this international discussion. We've had one session already, so we're diving into this kind of section by section of his book. But it's with all of these concerns that we've been talking about here, and because they're not just a Canadian concern, they are actually a global concern.
Yeah.
So I'm inspired that there are people around this globe who are as concerned as we are and who are looking at, you know, different ways to address this, both collectively and individually by country. And the other thing that I'm really encouraged by is it's multi-generational for, it's not just through the eyes of boomers or whatever. It's through, the fact that we are all here together interacting in how we can actually keep that in mind as we seek out solutions. So,
Just since you connected risk with this global conversation, Kathleen, I want to mention that I am in the process of patenting modular risk with the intent to apply it to multiple industries,
oh, right
multiple
on.
problems.
Good.
So
Excellent.
this idea that, the whole landscape is shifting, we're all innovating together, we're dealing with multiple intersections together, and we
Right.
don't really know how best to work with these issues.
I
So
know.
building a collaborative risk intelligence platform is what I'm doing, and I'm in the process of patenting it.
That's excellent. So I I really, really I like what you're doing, Atul, and I really want to
Thank you.
support it. And so the more I can do that, I'll rely on your advice on how I can better do that. I'm just interested in, you know, helping this world
Yeah.
smart up.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining everybody today.
Thank you.
Great
Yeah.
discussion. And over time, I've got to run and we'll always
Thank you.
continue the conversation. So, any other challenges worth discussing? Same time, same place on Wednesday. Have a great day.
All right.
Have
Thank
a
you.
good
Good
one.
Thanks
night.
very